All right, Sheila. So let's get started. So easing the transition into a senior living, let's just say senior living environment, could be assisted living, could be memory care, could be a skilled nursing, aka a nursing home, anything at all. Could be independent living, even smoothing this transition. What are your opening thoughts on this topic?
Well, I want to level set and acknowledge that there's a lot that goes on before we're helping our loved ones settle in, right? So there's a
Mhm,
whole decision process, which for my family took about 9 months.
mhm.
There's hard conversations, there's tears, there's research and phone calls and tours and selecting a community. And that's all a sort of a different topic. And today we're going to focus a little bit more on once that decision has been made, what do we do? So I think mainly from my personal experience, a couple of things come up for me. Expect some stress. It's normal. You're going to feel stressed. Don't be scared or surprised by it. Expect a mix of emotions, including guilt and sadness and excitement and all the things. And one thing that I wasn't really thinking of at the time, but prepare yourself to shift from your former caregiving role to a new kind of caregiving. There's going to be different skill sets with this. There's going to be different schedules that you follow. You're going to have to share your load with a community team that you're not used to sharing that with. And it takes time to feel okay about all of this. So there's my big opening.
No, I thank you, first of all, for sort of drawing that line in the sand, because I wholeheartedly agree. And, for you, it was 9 months, right, to get to the point where you were actually the person you were caring for was making a transition. It was, over a year for me, just in that dialogue back and forth with my mother. So really important distinction that you drew there. I would just add, if there are questions about that part of it, which is a loaded topic to your point, Sheila, in and of itself, you know, feel free to ask them in the Q&A. We'll address them as we can, of course. And Sheila, I love what you were saying there around sort of preparing for a range of emotions. I forget exactly the words that you used, but I remember I don't know, I didn't like have conscious expectations, I don't think, if I'm thinking back. But I remember this just strange feeling when it was final, when my mom was there, like on drop off day, quote unquote, right?
Right.
And I remember this, and it was, every situation's different, of course, which is another caveat we should put out there. In my case, my mom was living with dementia. She was still functional at that point. She was still engaged with the world around her and all of that. But that was a part of her story. But I remember this. It was like almost like this. It wasn't a weight, but I just didn't know what to do with
Mm.
with this thing that I was feeling, that I couldn't really identify the emotions that I was feeling in that. It was. I just remember it feeling really strange, almost out of body at the beginning, and then it's like from there I was feeling my way around in the dark almost. Like, what do I do? Do I visit right
Right.
away? Do I give her time? Like, what? It just felt so strange, all of it. So, and I think maybe I was like, well, wait, I was thinking like caregiving's over.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just was an
Yeah.
odd place. So anyway, it's just, if you've been through the drop off, quote unquote, and experiences with that, like we'd love to hear how you experienced that. But Sheila, I want to spend the bulk of the time today talking about things that we can be doing or thinking about to sort of limit the turbulence in this period of time, I
Yeah.
guess, for the people that we love who we're helping make this transition, but also for ourselves. So like what is the first thing that comes to mind for you when you're thinking about trying to make this process as smooth as possible?
Well, I think we talk about this a lot, Matt. You mentioned your mom. I was caring for my mom, and her issues were not cognitive. They were strictly physical. She had a bad fall. She had broken her hip. It was clearly, a physical thing that she couldn't stay on her own. So, what I learned, and some things I did well and some things not so much, now I know. I wish I had more consistent conversations leading up to it. I wish I had addressed her nervousness, and asked what she was nervous about and talk it through, and then also hear or encourage her to talk more about the things that she might be looking forward to. So,
Mhm.
I wish I had more consistent conversations. I want to point out that I think it's really easy for us to dismiss their fears and only talk about the upside because we're trying to almost make ourselves feel better about doing this. So instead of saying, like, hey, mom, you're going to have so many people to talk to, and now you're living alone, you might just sort of validate how they're feeling in the moment. Don't dismiss that feeling that they're having. It's like, this is a really big change, and it makes sense that, it's scary and hard for you. And the
Mhm.
last thing on this one, which I think is so important, and there's science behind this, whenever possible, whenever you can, give them choices. Allow them to choose what to bring or how to arrange their room so that the move feels more like something they're a part of, that's happening with them instead of happening to them. And it will improve their emotional health, their physical health. It has to do with longevity. So many wonderful things come when you feel you have a sense of purpose and independence.
Mhm. Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
I love that. I love that the phrase, happening with them as opposed to happening to them. And there could be variations of that, but I love that. I wish I too wish that was an opportunity as I look back, and we all do the best we can. This is an incredibly difficult thing, but yeah, that would be an opportunity for me. Also, something though I want to hit on that you said you sort of reference our guilt, right, as the caregiver, which that I felt that in my bones when you said it, because I think that's what I was, as I look back, I was really struggling with. And if I could do this again, I would, and it's not easy to do by any stretch, right? But I would try and nip that guilt in the bud, because in reality, I had nothing to be guilty of, nothing to feel guilty about. Like I had exhausted the options in our situation. This was, for a variety of reasons, clearly the best option to try in that case. So and that guilt really for time, until I saw how she was settling in, it really ate me up, right?
Yeah.
Because for my mom anyway, it ultimately wound up really working well. Like, she adjusted eventually, and it
Yep.
was a good, happy story. It was
Yep.
good for her. All that to say, there's a question in the Q&A that says, how do you determine that it's time for a loved one to go into a senior living community, or have them keep staying at home? I think so. There's a resource that was dropped in the chat about that very topic, question asker, and I would say it boils down to the whole person and the sort of, I'll just say, family situation. And I'm generalizing here because this is a really, like, this is a key fundamental question that so many people sort of are faced with. And it really comes down to what to 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 you and whoever's involved in the care with you, determining together what the best course of action is for the
Right.
person that you're caring for. And the best course of action could be defined in any number of different ways for different people. It could be social activity, it could be quality of, like, overall quality of life, it could be safety, it could be direct care needs that the person you're caring for has, or some combination thereof, right? That would be my initial reaction, Sheila. How about you to that question?
Yeah, totally. And I love how you said it's like backing up and looking at the whole picture, because I also want to include the caregiver here. I
Mhm.
also want to include the quality of life and the safety for the caregiver. So you can't just say, everything is fine with my loved one when you are falling yourself or when you have health issues that you can't manage. So you kind of look at it as a whole and say, overall, what is going to be the best scenario for me at this time? And I also loved how you said, I'm going to try this, because some things that we are often try to do is put this in a bucket and say, this is forever.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily forever. You're going to try it. And it's also a great thing to say to your loved one, we need to try this right now. I've had
Mhm.
falls or whatever the situation is, or you're not safe. We're going to try it.
Mm-hmm.
You could switch to a different location. You could come up with other plans. Who knows what will happen in the future? But it's really important to not lock yourself into this is forever and it's a scary thing and I don't know how I'm going to manage it.
You can't state the importance of that. Like that was ultimately one of the things that got me over the finish line with my mom was framing it as temporary, as us needing to try
Mhm.
for X, Y, and Z reasons. But question asker, I hope that answers your question. I guess the last thing I'd say on it is it really, as I alluded to previously, like this sort of question really lends itself well to a one-on-one discussion. So we'll be sure to follow up after today's session. So, all right, Sheila. So, in terms of things that we can be doing or thinking about to smooth the transition, I love where you started, which really in my mind is about communicating and validating, right? Both
Mhm.
the good or the potentially scary and the potentially exciting, maybe.
Right.
That's how you sort of broke it down, which totally agree with that. And I love like accentuating the potentially positive parts. I love not as a means to sort of hide the stuff that's not
Right.
great about it or people are worked up about, but like just to balance it, right? So there's a bunch of different things that fall into that. How about pre-visits? Seeing the community ahead of time.
Mhm. Really great idea. It is something that I did with my mom. It's not always possible, but if you can, you certainly want to go and check it out yourself. But if there's ever an opportunity to take your loved one with you, and depending on what kind of facility it is, it could be having a meal there, it could be sitting in and watching an activity, it could be just meeting a staff member and introducing them, getting to know them by name. It could really dramatically reduce the drama the day that you're moving in to be there several times.
Hmm. Familiarity, yeah. I love the point on staff members. So this is,
Yeah.
I'm just looking at our list here we had in our prep for this session, but I don't see that on there. And I'm kind of mad at myself for not having it on there. But meeting and sort of trying intentionally to build relationships with every potential staff member
Mhm.
possible is just I found I was given that advice. It was one of the things I acted on actually, and it really helped. It was helpful because and everyone, not just the person at the front desk, but all of the clinical staff, so the activities and engagement department, the people in the people working in the dining hall, for lack of a better term, the maintenance people, everyone. We tried to talk to everyone we could, and that actually did translate into well, it made me feel better in the short term, but it also I think it was sort of a little bit of an accelerator for helping mom in my case build sort of some relationships with the people that should be living with, frankly.
Yep.
So there's another question following up on what we were talking about earlier, Sheila, that I think is really important and that I want to address. So, the question previously was, how do we determine that it's time for your loved one to go into senior living? And we were talking about this idea of it doesn't have to be forever. And
Right.
I was injecting like sort of framing it as temporary that we need to try this now. The question is, but we can't leave it open ended,
Right.
right? How do you deal with someone when they're saying repeatedly, "I want to go home, take me home, take me home"?
Mhm.
Like, what are your thoughts there?
Well, it's pretty common, first of all. I have to tell you that there was a time when I would visit my mom sometimes and she's not expecting me to come in and I'd open the door and I'd find her crying in her chair, which just breaks your heart, right? It's just I mean, I could feel it today just seeing that. And who knows what the issue was, but in my head it was, she wanted out. I like to think of two different ways of looking at this. Sort of mid to late dementia versus perfectly cognitive and there. And so there's a slightly different way that you would address that. I think in both cases, you always want to validate. It makes total sense. I understand. I'm hearing you. Tell me more, that kind of thing, no matter what the situation is. If it is dementia, we follow the same dementia rules that we always do. Redirect, avoid arguing with facts. If she's saying something that is not true, just go with it. Redirect, get her involved with something else. change the situation, change the situation as far as like bring something in or distract a little bit. Non-dementia makes total sense. I hear you. I wish I could make this work. I'm going to keep coming back. I'm here today. This is what I have for today. With redirecting in both cases, I have to tell you, food works a lot. Food is great. Let's go for a coffee and a donut, or let's look through a photo album. Let's go outside, go for a walk. If that situation is reasonable, anything that you can do to soothe, just like you would anybody who's upset. But I do think the validation is key for both situations.
Agreed. And I guess there would be a follow up to this. So I had similar sort of experiences. I never opened the door to see mom crying, Sheila, but like I the question hits me in the heart as well because I lived through that and sort of thankfully followed sort of the path that you're sort of alluding to there around redirecting. And again, my situation was a dementia situation, and over time that sort of dissipated, right? As time went on, as she got more settled. But I'm just not necessarily to take the conversation in a different direction, but like at what point do we say, would the caregiver say, okay, like it's been X amount of time and this is still happening, right? Like
Mm.
to our point about us trying this, it doesn't have to be forever. At what point would we make the call and say, okay, maybe this isn't working, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and I think it depends on every situation.
yeah.
It is something important to understand even with yourself that you can adjust.
Hmm.
Like, if something genuinely is not working after a fair trial period, you can advocate, in that situation, or you can change your mind and shift something,
Hmm.
and look in a different direction. It goes back to the connecting with your care team early, though. I'd say if it has to do with that location and that community, connecting with someone very early before there's any issues builds a relationship, builds rapport, like, "Hey," no, say their name a lot. Then when
Hmm.
something comes up, then they're not just like, "Oh, she's a squeaky wheel," or "He's a squeaky wheel," and it's always gonna be a
Yeah.
complainer. You have a relationship.
You're being proactive. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And then this is kind of sort of getting into something where, one of the hardest parts, there were a lot of hard parts about the transition, from being honest, but one of the hardest parts was this sort of initial period where I was by design trying to give mom space and not be there every day and let her settle in.
Yeah.
I was dying to know what was going on and how she was doing and what all of that, right? So I do think it's important to give that space, and visiting every day right at the start,
Yeah.
right? There needs to be a little bit of separation to let them sort of settle into what, hopefully would be their new, a new living environment where they ideally will thrive. But what you're talking about in terms of connecting with the staff, at that point, that's when I started. I was calling the staff for updates, just
Mhm.
trying to build relationship, trying to, I'm Rosemary's son. I'm feeling a little anxious, just wondering how she's doing. If you give me a call back,
Yeah.
some semblance of a relationship came out of that. And, I was getting the updates in the short term that I was dying to get, but I was also in the process of that building a relationship with these people. So,
Yeah. Yeah, smart.
uh, but that sort of it's very difficult to do, but providing that space at the upfront is, I think, as hard as it is really, really important. Um,
Yeah, it takes time. Usually I would say 4 or 5 weeks before someone's really truly adjusting.
yeah.
And there's gonna be good days and bad days. So
Mm.
one thing that's sort of hard for caregivers I know a lot is they wanna make a big change based on the first hard week. And you
Mhm.
just kinda have to settle in and go, "Okay, like, let's talk to the care team, let's see what's going on, let's make some assessments," and
Mhm.
and see if it levels off because it almost always does.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Okay. A couple other things that I think come in, I think, help. Maybe they seem obvious, maybe they don't, but in terms of their space itself, their apartment,
Mhm.
making it as familiar as possible, right? Obviously, one of the things that struck me was, and my mom went to her senior living accommodations from an apartment, so she didn't have a ton of stuff to begin with, but that was an adjustment, right? Like, they would she could bring even less stuff to senior living. So like, but that was fine. We got through it, but like finding a way to still make it familiar, pictures and all that sort of stuff, I think maybe seems obvious, but it's important to mention. It's
Yeah.
that stuff it plays a role in
Yeah, even little
these
things like
situations.
their favorite coffee mug, or you don't think about those things, but those small rituals from home. And like when you're taking a familiar chair or a picture, put it in the same spot. Like
Mm,
if there's always a family photo on this little table, do the same thing here.
mm.
It's little small details that go like, okay, now I feel like I'm home.
Yeah, right. And speaking of small details, something that I think is another thing that I think is really, I would suggest everyone do this in some way, shape, or form. But this idea of telling your loved one's story, right? So if
Mhm.
uh, if you have a loved one in senior living, there's sort of like an intake process, right, where you share certain information about your loved one, obviously their name and basic stuff, right? But going beyond whatever that form is to actually tell your person's story. In my case, it would have been, this is Rosemary. She has a son, three granddaughters, a daughter-in-law. This is what they do. This is how often she sees them. She was a registered nurse for 40 years.
Yeah,
Like in a narrative style, she likes long walks on the beach or likes to travel, whatever those things
right.
are, right? Like tell their story. And this was given to me as advice, but I literally typed it out in
Yeah.
Rosemary's story and had it on the table for
Yeah.
anyone to see when they were in
So
there
good.
helping her.
So
Right?
good. And I mentioned this to you too. We had a caregiver come to our support group who said that they did the same kind of thing with a whiteboard. They decorated it, they put it outside the husband's door. You can't always do that, but I love the idea. It gives the visitor or the care team something to talk about. What's their
Hmm.
favorite sports team? What's their
Hmm.
nickname? What hobbies do they like? Because when people come to visit, sometimes they don't know what to say. And
Hmm.
if it's right there, it's sort of like a script for someone who feels awkward about that.
That plus it's, these, let's face it, I mean, there are staffing challenges in
Yeah.
this industry. You have, the aides that are working on certain floors, they have a lot of people under their care.
Yeah.
And there's just like that aspect of it too, right? There's
Yeah.
this is just another way of sort of showing the people that are caring for the ones that we love who they are, and the fact that it sounds good that but they're a person, right? They're not just another sort of occupant of a part
Yeah,
you
resident,
see.
you bet.
You know what I'm saying? So, and I think the relationship there's, I guess that's a theme here as we're talking about, but like this idea of a relationship and I think all the communication that goes into that is really integral to this whole idea of making this what is frankly going to be a bumpy time, right? Any
Yep,
transition is,
yep,
uh, but making it is smoothing out the bumps as much as possible, I guess is what I'd say.
right.
All right, Sheila, time flies when we're having fun. We have 1 minute here. Any last thoughts for the group?
Yeah, I think one thing that I really wanna make sure we end with is please take care of yourselves, the caregivers at this time. It's a really hard emotional and physical time on you. Please don't neglect your own care. The decision itself was hard. The settling in is hard in a different way. It does usually get easier. Allow it some time and, just take good care.
I love those. Mine would be going back to what you mentioned earlier, Sheila, around the guilt. Like if you're feeling guilt for being in this situation, uh, you know, like whatever you're feeling is valid, of course, but there's no guilt to be had in this situation. So I wish that's something I wish I remembered, and I wish that for anybody on the call who's in the midst of one of these transitions or has one coming on the horizon. And as always, Sheila, as you say, I hope the audience takes good care.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye now.
Bye-bye.